Water. Now. Not sparkling. They don't like sparkling. And hurry, we don't have all day.
She didn't even look up from her tablet when she said it. Didn't ask my name, didn't wonder why a grown man in a plain gray jacket and worn sneakers was standing near the conference room door instead of sitting at the table. She just assumed, the way people do when they've decided in half a second exactly where you belong in a room. My name is Marcus Whitfield. I run a renewable energy investment fund with $11 billion in assets under management. I have signed term sheets that saved companies from bankruptcy with a single stroke of a pen. I have stood on stages in front of energy ministers from 4 continents. And 40 minutes before that woman told me to fetch water like I was hired help, I had walked into that building alone. No assistant, no security detail, no black car idling outside. Just me, a worn leather folder under my arm, and a decision I made a long time ago that I was never going to let anyone perform for money in front of me ever again. What that woman did not know, standing there with her tablet and her clipped voice and her total certainty that I was nobody, was that the company begging for a $20 million lifeline that week was 38 days from missing payroll. And the only signature standing between that company surviving and 300 employees losing their jobs was mine. She was about to find that out, but not yet. To understand why I was standing quietly by that door instead of sitting at the head of that table, you have to go back 30 years. My parents came to this country with 4 suitcases and $1,100 between them. My father, Andres, had been an electrical engineer back home, the kind of man who could look at a wall of wiring and see it the way other people see a sentence, logical, ordered, solvable. But engineering degrees from another country don't always translate here, not on paper, not to the people doing the hiring. So for the first 6 years in this country, my father worked nights stocking shelves at a grocery store and days doing electrical work off the books for cash, one job at a time, one referral at a time, building a name for himself the only way available to him. My mother, Elena, cleaned offices downtown, glass towers full of people who never learned her name, who left coffee cups for her to wash, and never once asked how her day was. She used to tell me when I was young that dignity wasn't something anyone could hand you or take from you. It was something you carried inside, and you decided every single day whether you were going to let someone else's rudeness convince you otherwise. By the time I was 10, my father had saved enough plus a small loan from a cousin to open his own electrical contracting business, Whitfield Electric. Just him and 2 other guys at first. I remember the day he hung the sign himself, standing on a ladder in the rain, refusing to let anyone else do it. That business grew, slowly, honestly, one job well done leading to the next referral. By the time I was 15, my father had 11 employees and a small office with his name on the door. Then a man named Richard Doyle came into our lives. Doyle presented himself as an investment advisor, someone who specialized in helping immigrant-owned small businesses grow beyond their means, into commercial contracts, into real capital. He was polished. He wore a watch my father would work 3 months to afford. He spoke with the kind of easy confidence that made people trust him before he'd even finished a sentence. He told my father that for a modest investment, his life savings plus a loan against the equity in the business, he could triple it within 18 months through a portfolio of guaranteed municipal contracts. My father wired him $140,000 over the course of 4 months. It was everything. Every dollar saved from 14 years of double shifts and underbid jobs and Christmases with fewer presents so there'd be something left over for the business. Doyle disappeared in March. The number disconnected, the office address turned out to be a mailbox rental. The FBI eventually connected him to 11 other families, most of them immigrant business owners, all approached the same way, all trusting him for the exact same reason, because he looked and sounded like someone who belonged in rooms they didn't yet feel confident walking into themselves. We lost the house first, then the business 6 months later, when the loan against it came due and there was nothing left to cover it. My father, a man who had built something with his own hands twice, once as an engineer back home, once as a contractor here, sat at our kitchen table with his head down for 3 straight days. I had never seen him like that. Not broken exactly, just emptied. I was 15 years old, and I made a promise to myself in that kitchen that I have kept every single day since. I promised that I would never let anyone's polish, their watch, their confident voice, or their expensive suit tell me who deserved my trust or my respect. And I promised that I would never, ever let anyone's plainness, their tired clothes, their quiet voice, their lack of performance tell me who did not deserve those same things either. That promise shaped every decision I made for the next 25 years. I studied engineering on scholarships and loans, the way my father should have been allowed to build his life the first time around, without a Richard Doyle standing in the way. I focused on energy systems because I had grown up watching my father wire buildings that would outlast him, and I wanted to build something that would outlast me too. Something the world actually needed, not something built to extract value and disappear. At 29, I co-founded a small solar infrastructure company with 2 former classmates. We built out modular solar arrays for underserved communities, places the big utility companies considered too unprofitable to prioritize. For the first 3 years, we barely survived. We slept in the office more nights than not. We missed payroll twice ourselves, and I had to call employees personally and ask them to trust me for 2 more weeks. I remember making those calls and thinking about my father sitting at that kitchen table and promising myself I would do everything in my power to never let another family go through what mine went through. In year 4, our largest early investor, a man who had backed us when nobody else would, tried to force us out of our own company during a funding round. He'd found a legal maneuver, a clause buried in paperwork we hadn't read carefully enough in our exhaustion and inexperience, that would have let him seize controlling interest and push my co-founders and me out entirely. We spent 4 months fighting it, nearly lost everything a second time, this time not because of a con man and a nice watch, but because of the exact kind of casual, entitled cruelty that comes from someone assuming that because you're young, because you're tired, because you don't have a team of lawyers yet, you don't deserve to keep what you built. We won. Barely. And the day we won, I sat down and rewrote how I would run my fund once I had one. I decided that when I evaluated companies, when I sat across from founders and executives, I would never let their polish tell me the whole story, and I would never let my own presence intimidate a room into performing for me instead of showing me who they really were.
So when I built Whitfield Renewable Partners into the $11 billion fund it is today, I made one rule for myself that I have never broken. On final stage due diligence, the meetings that decide whether a company lives or dies, I show up alone. No assistant, no security, no car with my name attached to the reservation. Plain clothes. I sit quietly, sometimes near the door, sometimes in the back, and I watch how a room treats someone they assume has no power at all. Because here is what I learned from my father's kitchen table and from that boardroom fight in my 20s. The way a company treats the person they think doesn't matter is the truest test of who they are. Contracts can be renegotiated, financials can be restated, but character shows up in the small moment, the moment nobody thinks is being watched. That is why I was standing quietly near the door of that conference room instead of sitting at the head of the table. That is why she looked at me and saw an assistant. The company was called Solera Grid Systems, battery storage technology, genuinely brilliant engineering, the kind of innovation that could help stabilize renewable power grids during peak demand. I had followed their work for 2 years before they ever came to us. Their technology was real. Their finances were not. They had burned through 2 prior funding rounds faster than projected, chasing a manufacturing scale-up that outpaced their revenue. Payroll for 312 employees was 38 days from being unmet. Their CEO, a brilliant engineer named David Reyes, had personally guaranteed a portion of their remaining credit line, meaning if this deal collapsed, He stood to lose his house along with his company. They had pitched 11 funds before us. 8 passed outright. 2 offered terms so predatory they would have gutted the founder's equity and handed control to outside investors within 18 months. 1 fund, mine, was still deciding. This meeting, the one where I stood quietly near the door in a plain grey jacket, was the final diligence session before my investment committee would vote. $20 million, the difference between 312 families keeping their jobs and a company disappearing into the graveyard of promising ideas that ran out of runway. I had told David Reyes when we scheduled this that I would be attending in person and that I preferred to observe quietly before asking questions.
I did not tell him I would come alone, dressed like I did every final diligence visit, specifically so I could watch how his team operated when they thought the only person in the room who mattered hadn't arrived yet. I walked in 11 minutes early. The receptionist, a young woman named Priya, greeted me politely, asked who I was there to see, and when I said Whitfield Renewable Partners, she offered to get me water and show me to the conference room. I told her I was fine, thank you, and found my own way, which is something I always do. I like to see hallways. I like to see how people talk to each other when they don't think it matters. That is how I found myself standing near the closed conference room door at 9:52 a.m., 8 minutes before the scheduled start, listening to raised voices inside, the kind of last-minute panic that happens before every high-stakes pitch, everyone rehearsing, everyone tense. The door opened, and that is where the video, so to speak, begins. The woman who opened the door was named Vanessa Cole, Chief of Staff at Solera Grid Systems, 41 years old, 11 years with the company, the person who had built the internal machine that let David Reyes focus on engineering while she handled everything else, logistics, scheduling, investor relations, the countless invisible tasks that keep a company running. She was, by every account I later reviewed, extremely good at her job. She was also, I would learn over the next 40 minutes, someone who had built an entire internal hierarchy of who mattered and who didn't, based entirely on how people presented themselves, and she had decided the instant she saw a man in a plain jacket and tired sneakers standing quietly near her conference room door that I did not matter. Water, now, not sparkling, they don't like sparkling, and hurry, we don't have all day. I said nothing at first. I have learned over many years of these quiet diligence visits that the first few seconds tell you almost everything. I could have corrected her immediately. I could have said my name. Instead, I walked to the small kitchenette down the hall, poured 6 glasses of still water onto a tray, and carried them back into the room, setting them down at each seat without a word. Nobody at the table looked at me either. David Reyes was reviewing his notes, visibly nervous, running through numbers in his head. 2 other executives, the CFO and the head of engineering, sat rigid, checking their phones, checking the door. Vanessa stood at the head of the table, running the room with the practiced authority of someone who had done this 100 times. I took a seat near the back corner of the room, the way I always do. I did not announce that I was the investor they were waiting for. I wanted to see what happened first. What happened first was that Vanessa began the meeting by talking over David twice in the first 4 minutes, correcting his framing of the manufacturing delays in a tone that made it clear she believed she understood the investor's concerns better than the CEO who had built the technology. Not unusual in itself. Chiefs of staff often know the investor relationship better than founders do. But then, 7 minutes in, she turned to me. "Excuse me," she said. "Can you check if the investor's car has arrived downstairs? He's late." I told her I hadn't seen anyone downstairs. "Well, can you go check?" Sharper this time. "We need him in this room in the next 5 minutes or this whole meeting falls apart." I said, quietly, that I believed the investor was already present. She looked at me the way you look at a math problem that isn't adding up. A flicker of confusion immediately replaced by irritation, because in her mind, the explanation that made sense was not, "This man might be the investor." It was, "This assistant is confused or being difficult." "I don't think you understand how important this meeting is," she said. "This isn't the time for jokes. Please go check the lobby." I stood, walked to the door, and stood near it but did not leave the room. I wanted to see how much further this would go. It went further. Quick task. If you are enjoying and believe stories like this deserve to be heard more, kindly like and subscribe to this channel. Thank you. Now back to the story. 3 minutes later, David Reyes, sensing the tension without understanding its source, asked me directly, kindly, if I was with Whitfield Renewable Partners. Before I could answer, Vanessa cut in. "He's not with the fund, David. He's—" She paused, looking at me properly for the first time, taking in the plain jacket, the folder under my arm, the absence of any of the signals she had been trained her entire career to look for. "I'm sorry, who exactly are you with? Are you a driver? Building services?" "I came here for the meeting," I said. "This meeting is for principals only," she said, and there was an edge in her voice now, the edge of someone protecting territory she believed was hers to protect. "If you're a +1 or an assistant, you're welcome to wait outside. We can't have unaccounted people in a room this sensitive." I told her, calmly, that I understood, and that I would be happy to wait if that was what she preferred. I picked up my folder and took 2 steps toward the door. Here is the moment that mattered. This is where everything could have gone differently. If Vanessa Cole in that instant had simply asked one more question, "Wait, actually, can I get your name?" the entire next 30 minutes would never have happened. But she didn't ask. She had already decided who I was, and people rarely ask questions they believe they already know the answers to. "Actually," she said, before I reached the door, "since you're just waiting around anyway, can you run downstairs and grab more coffee? The pot in the kitchen is empty, and our real guest is going to want some when he gets here." I stood in that doorway for 3 full seconds, long enough to feel every part of my father's story sitting in my chest, long enough to decide, once again, exactly what kind of man I was going to be in the next few minutes. "Of course," I said. I went and got the coffee. To be honest about something, I did not go get that coffee because I was weak or because I didn't know how to stand up for myself. I went and got it because I have learned, over 25 years of building a fund from nothing, that the most dangerous man in the room is never the loudest one, and that people reveal their true character most completely in the moments when they believe there will be no consequences. I wanted to see exactly how far Vanessa Cole would go. When I returned with the coffee, the meeting had moved into financial projections. David Reyes was walking through the manufacturing scale-up timeline, and I could see from the back corner where I had retaken my seat that his numbers were honest. Overly optimistic in places, the way founders' numbers often are, but honest. He wasn't hiding the payroll crisis. He was addressing it directly, which told me something important about his character, before Vanessa had told me anything at all about hers. 15 minutes in, I asked a question, a real one, about their battery cell supplier redundancy, a detail that mattered enormously to whether this technology could actually scale reliably. It was the kind of question only someone who deeply understood the technical and financial mechanics of energy storage would think to ask. Vanessa answered before David could. "I think that's a little beyond what we need to get into right now," she said. Not unkindly exactly, but with the unmistakable tone of someone redirecting a child who has wandered into an adult conversation. "Why don't you let us handle the technical side, and you can just take notes for whoever you're assisting?" David glanced at me, confused again. Opening his mouth to say something, Vanessa cut him off with a small hand gesture, the kind of gesture that says, "Don't worry about him, keep going, we're on a timeline." The head of engineering, a young man named Oliver, actually turned to me at one point and started to ask, quietly, almost apologetically, "Sorry, are you—" before Vanessa interrupted again, louder this time, visibly irritated that the meeting kept getting derailed by what she perceived as a confusion over an assistant's role. "Can everyone please focus?" she said. "We have exactly 40 minutes with the investor when he arrives, and I need this room clean and this deck memorized before then." At the 22-minute mark, she asked me to give up my seat. "Actually, can you stand? We're going to need that chair when the investors team arrives, and I'd rather not have extra bodies at the table." I stood. I moved to the wall. I said nothing. At the 26-minute mark, she handed me her coat, without looking at me, without asking, simply extending her arm the way you would to hand something to furniture. "Hold this, it's in my way." I took the coat. I want you to sit with that moment for a second, because I have sat with it many times since. I am a man who has negotiated with energy ministers. I have signed checks larger than the annual budget of some small cities. I built a fund from a folding table in a rented office, not unlike the one my father once had his name on, and I stood in the corner of that conference room holding a stranger's coat because I wanted to see the full shape of who Vanessa Cole really was before I let her know who I was. At the 31-minute mark, she brought up her own tenure, the way people do when they feel their authority slipping without understanding why. "I have run investor relations for this company for 11 years, she said, loud enough to be heard by everyone in the room, though I'm not sure who she was reminding, them or herself. "I know exactly how these meetings need to go, and I am not going to let anything jeopardize this deal. Do you understand how much is riding on this? This investor could save this entire company, and I need everyone in this room, including you," she glanced at me, coat still draped over my arm, "to take this seriously." I told her I understood completely how much was riding on it. At 34 minutes, a young associate named Priya, the same young woman who had greeted me in the lobby, knocked and stepped into the room looking for Vanessa. "Sorry to interrupt," she said. "I just wanted to check, is Mr. Whitfield's car still expected, or—" "He's not here yet," Vanessa said, waving her off. "We're managing." Priya's eyes moved to me, standing quietly in the corner with a coat over my arm, and something flickered across her face. A question. She had checked me in downstairs. She knew my name, but she also clearly did not want to contradict her chief of staff in front of a room full of anxious executives, so she said nothing and left. That almost moment, that near intervention, was the closest anyone came to stopping what was about to happen, and even she backed away from it. At 38 minutes, the conference room door opened again. This time, it was David Reyes's business partner and co-founder, a woman named Anita Kapoor, who had been finishing a call in another room. She stepped in, scanning the table, and her eyes landed on me in the corner. Her expression changed instantly. "Marcus," she said, and the room went completely still. "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you'd already arrived. Please sit. Why are you standing back there?" Vanessa Cole's face did something I have seen only a handful of times in 25 years of doing business. It did not fall gradually. It collapsed all at once, the way a building implodes when the supports are removed simultaneously. The confident posture, the clicked authority in her voice, the certainty that had carried her through the last 40 minutes, all of it disappeared in under 2 seconds. "I'm sorry," Anita continued, still not fully registering the room's frozen silence. "Marcus, you didn't have to carry your own— Wait, is that Vanessa's coat?" David Reyes looked at me, looked at the coat over my arm, looked at Vanessa, whose mouth had opened slightly, no sound coming. I watched the exact moment the math resolved itself behind his eyes. The water I'd fetched, the coffee, the chair I'd given up, the question about battery redundancy that no assistant on earth would have thought to ask. "Oh my God," David said quietly. "You're Mr. Whitfield." "I am," I said. I set Vanessa's coat gently on the back of a chair. "Marcus Whitfield, Whitfield Renewable Partners. It's genuinely good to finally be in this meeting properly." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it, the kind you can feel pressing against your ears. Vanessa Cole spoke first, and her voice had lost every trace of the authority it carried 30 seconds earlier. "Mr. Whitfield, I am so deeply sorry. I had no idea. If I had known who you were, I never would have—" "That," I said, "is exactly the problem. I did not raise my voice. I have never once in 25 years of business needed to raise my voice to make a point land. I simply looked around the room, at David's stricken face, at Anita's dawning horror, at Vanessa's trembling hands, and I said what I had been carrying since I picked up that coffee pot 20 minutes earlier. I wasn't testing you to catch you, I said. I came here hoping you'd pass. I do this at every final diligence meeting, every single one, because I learned a long time ago that anyone can be gracious to someone they need something from. The real test is how you treat someone you believe you need nothing from at all. I turned to Vanessa directly. You asked me to fetch water, to fetch coffee, to give up my seat, to hold your coat. Not because I did anything to earn that treatment, but because you looked at my jacket and my shoes and decided in about 4 seconds that I didn't matter enough to ask a single question about who I actually was. Her eyes were wet now. Mr. Whitfield, please. I've worked at this company for 11 years. I believe you've never done this to someone you knew was important, I said. That's not the same thing as never doing it at all. David Reyes stood up slowly. Marcus, I am so sorry. This isn't who we are as a company, I promise you. I need you to know that. I looked at him, and I meant every word of what I said next. David, your technology is genuinely brilliant. Your financials, even the difficult parts, were honest with me today. And that matters more to me than almost anything else in this business. I still believe in what you're building. I paused. But I need to understand something before I can move forward with this investment. I need to understand whether what happened in this room for the last 40 minutes is an isolated moment or whether it's a pattern I'd be investing alongside. The room was completely silent. Anita Kapoor looked at Vanessa. David looked at Vanessa, and I watched Vanessa Cole, a woman who 11 minutes ago had commanded that room with total authority, standing frozen, with her hand pressed against the back of a chair to keep herself steady. I told David that before my investment committee would move forward, I needed 48 hours, and I needed his HR department to conduct a genuine internal review, not a defensive one, not a cover your liability one, a real one. I told him I would have my own team review the findings alongside his. What that review found over the following 2 days was not a single bad moment. It was a pattern 11 years in the making. 3 former junior employees, contacted through a confidential outside review process, described a consistent experience of being spoken to by Vanessa as though their presence in a room was conditional on their usefulness to her in that exact moment. One young engineer, a woman named Sarah Kim, had left the company 2 years earlier after Vanessa repeatedly excluded her from investor meetings, despite her being the lead engineer on the very technology being pitched, because, in Sarah's words, she never thought I looked the part of someone worth introducing. A vendor who had supplied office equipment for 6 years described being asked, more than once, to use the service entrance rather than the main lobby, despite every other vendor using the front door, because Vanessa had decided his appearance didn't match the image she wanted visitors to see when they walked in. An intern from 3 years earlier, contacted independently by a reporter after this story eventually became known within industry circles, described being made to fetch dry cleaning and personal coffee orders unrelated to any work task, treatment she said she never reported because she was afraid it would affect her recommendation letter. None of these people had filed formal complaints, not one, because, as Sarah Kim put it when she was finally asked, who was I supposed to complain to? She was the one who decided who got hurt in that building. That is the part of this story that matters most. The real injustice was never really about me. I have an $11 billion fund and a lifetime of experience that let me walk out of that room and simply choose whether or not to invest. Sarah Kim did not have that option. The vendor did not have that option. The intern did not have that option. They just had to absorb it, quietly, and hope it didn't happen again. 48 hours after that meeting, David Reyes called me personally. He told me that after reviewing the findings with his board, Solera Grid Systems had terminated Vanessa Cole's employment, effective immediately, with cause. He told me it was the hardest personnel decision he had made in 11 years of running the company, because she had genuinely been excellent at the operational side of her job for over a decade. But he said something else that told me he understood exactly what had gone wrong. Competence was never the question, he told me. The question was whether we were the kind of company that lets one person decide who deserves basic respect based on how they look, and the answer has to be no, or none of what we're building means anything.
I really want to be clear about something, because it matters. I did not ask for her termination. That was never my condition for investing. My only condition was honesty. That David's team look clearly and without excuses at what had actually happened and decide for themselves what kind of company they wanted to be. They decided on their own. I believe that decision, made without me demanding it, told me more about David Reyes's character than almost anything else in the entire process. 2 weeks later, my investment committee approved the $20 million round. 312 employees kept their jobs. Sarah Kim, the engineer who had been quietly pushed to the margins for 2 years, was contacted by David personally, offered her position back with a formal apology and a title reflecting the seniority her work had always deserved. She accepted. Vanessa Cole, for her part, wrote me a letter 3 weeks after her termination, not asking for her job back, not making excuses, just an honest accounting of what she had done, and an acknowledgement that she had spent 11 years mistaking authority for the right to decide, silently and instantly, who deserved her respect and who didn't. I don't know what happened to her after that. I hope, honestly, that she learns something from it that changes how she moves through the world going forward. That is not something I can control. It's not something any of us can control for another person. All we can control is whether we speak up when we see it happening, or whether we stay quiet and let it continue. 6 months later, I visited Solera Grid Systems again. Not for diligence this time. The round had long since closed, and the company was thriving, ahead of its own manufacturing projections for the first time in 2 years. I came because David had invited me to something. The company had implemented a new policy, one Anita Kapoor had championed personally after everything that happened. Every visitor to their office, regardless of how they arrived, regardless of what they wore, regardless of whether they announced themselves as an investor or a vendor or a job candidate, was to be treated with the same baseline courtesy. Greeted properly, asked their name, offered a seat at the table if they wanted one. It sounds like such a small thing. It is, in practice, one of the hardest habits for any organization to actually hold on to, because it requires people to resist their own fastest assumptions, moment after moment, day after day.
They also started something they called the Doyle Fund internally, a small internal grant program named, at my suggestion, after the con man who took everything my father built, not to honor him, but to remember him. The fund offers no-interest microloans to Solera employees' family members who were first-generation immigrant small business owners, the exact kind of person my father had been, the exact kind of person Richard Doyle had specifically targeted because he understood how badly they wanted to trust someone who looked like they belonged in the rooms they hadn't yet learned to walk into with confidence. Sarah Kim now leads Solera's battery engineering division. She was in the room the day I visited, presenting the technical roadmap for their next-generation storage system, confident and unhurried. The way someone speaks when they finally know their presence in a room was never something they had to earn through performance. I sat in the back corner of that same conference room, the way I always do. Nobody offered to fetch me water this time. Someone simply asked my name, and when I told them, they said, "Great, glad you're here. Grab a seat wherever's comfortable." The exact same way they would have said it to anyone else who walked through that door. That, more than the $20 million, more than the jobs saved, more than any of it, is the outcome that mattered most to me. I have thought a great deal over the years about why that moment in Vanessa Cole's conference room stays with people the way it does when I've told this story before. I don't think it's really about billionaires or plot twists, or the satisfaction of watching someone's confidence collapse when they realized who they were dismissing. I think it's because almost everyone listening to this has been on one side of that room or the other. Almost everyone has been dismissed by someone who decided, in 4 seconds, based on nothing real, that they didn't matter. And almost everyone, if they're honest with themselves, has also been the person doing the dismissing, at least once in some smaller way. A cashier, a delivery driver, someone in worn clothes standing quietly near a door. You will never know, standing in any room on any given day, who is actually standing across from you. You won't know what they've survived, what they've built, or what they're capable of, based on their jacket, or their shoes, or how loudly they announce themselves. The only thing you actually have control over is how you choose to treat someone before you know any of that. My mother used to tell me, dignity is something you carry, not something someone else can hand you or take away. I've spent my life trying to make sure I never take it from someone else either, especially not from someone who has no power to stop me if I did. So here's my question for you. If you were in that room, if you saw someone quietly absorbing that kind of treatment, and you had no idea who they really were, what would you have done? Would you have said something? Or would you have looked away and told yourself it wasn't your business? I'd genuinely like to know. Drop your honest answer in the comments. I'll read every single one. And if this story meant something to you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe, because the next Vanessa Cole is already out there, standing in front of someone she's about to underestimate completely. Thanks for watching. This story was made and produced by Akavox. And don't forget to like and subscribe.